Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby and Tom Bainbridge, anti-wellness and Wank3ry buckery. So today's topic is all about sleep, and we know that sleep is something that's spoken about numerous times, and it's usually the one that people don't want to address and can't really address and just turn a blind eye to it. So we're gonna talk about what sleep deprivation brings and also talk about some just random facts that are put out there that are taken a little bit too extreme, as well as ones that should actually be spoken about more, like how it impacts your body composition, how it impacts your performance, your immunity, how it impacts your blood sugars, and it can also create a state of pre-diabetes if done over a long period of time. So with that, I thought a great way to start this podcast off is just to talk about the stages of sleep. So we have non-REM sleep, we have REM sleep, and we have deep sleep. And we start off, we go into deep sleep, and it's our non-REM sleep that finishes off our sleep period. And through our sleep period, we have mini periods. And in those mini periods, that is considered a full sleep cycle. And we need to, each of those sleep cycles are about 90 minutes. But we also have to remember that everything is person dependent, but each one is about 90 minutes. And within those 90 minutes, you have those stages of sleep. And also keeping in mind that we have to complete a certain amount of those to feel like we're fully restored. Now, this is where there is some controversy with what is enough sleep, which we will get into. But you ideally want to complete, I think it's 4 of those sleep cycles.
I'm not, if you're asking me there, I'm not 100% sure on the specific. I think there's some guy that says I think it's 5.
About 4 to 5 sleep cycles at the minimum of that. But but also too much sleep can be just as detrimental as too little sleep. So with that, let's discuss the different segments of sleep and why they are so important. Now, one of my favorite ones that I'll talk about, and I'll let Tom take away the other one, is the deep sleep. Because the deep sleep is where your body is actually restoring you tear it up during the day. You want to build muscle. You want to burn fat. The muscle repair process, IGF-1, all of that is pretty much your deep sleep. That is where your body is getting restored, because it's almost like you hit the pillow. Your body has just got beaten about for the day, and now it wants to repair itself. I'll let you explain the rest in just the surface level.
Yeah, sure. So for the longest time, people thought that basically what happens when you go to sleep is your brain shuts off, nothing happens, you're essentially an unconscious person. But that's not really true. So what you can do is, if you're a scientist, you can put little electrodes on people's heads and you can measure their brain waves. So brain waves are just kind of like a bunch of electrical signal that goes on between neurons. Researchers can measure that, and that gives an indication of brain activity. There are more complicated ways of doing it, but that'll do for now. And through these brainwave analyses, it was found out that actually sleep is a active process. Your brain is doing sleep. Sleep is not something that happens to your brain is doing it. And there are different stages that researchers have highlighted. Now, it's important to remember that the stages are not like discrete. Like your brain waves increase and decrease throughout the night, and researchers have gone, right, once it hits that point, we're in a different stage. But these stages are somewhat fluid. Like the boundaries are not like, it's not like the brain waves drop off a cliff when you hit the next stage. But anyway, there's slight disagreement as to whether or not there are 3 or 4 non-REM sleep phases, with REM standing for rapid eye movement. That's when you're asleep and your eyes are jumping all over the place. Depending on whether or not the researcher believes stage 1 to be a real stage of sleep. So technically speaking, if we take it like you've got 4 non-REM sleep stages, stage 1 is when you're in bed, your eyes are closed, and you're still sort of conscious, but not really. Like, you're aware of what's going on around you, but you're basically asleep. This is kind of the stage that you run into, like if you fall asleep on the couch while you're watching TV, and you can still kind of hear the TV, but not really. That's stage 1 sleep. Some researchers don't consider that to be sleep. I don't think that matters. Then you've got stage 2. Stage 2 sleep is the first stage of like true sleep. This is where you get, they're called hypnagogic jerks. You know that thing when you, in your head, you're walking around and you trip over and then you wake up because you think you've fallen over? That's where that happens. That happens in stage 2. Or like you'll fall and suddenly you wake up. Some researchers have kind of posited that this is a hangover from when we were sleeping in trees. How true that is, I've got no idea. But yeah, so that's stage 2. Stage 3 is a slightly deeper phase of sleep. This is where a lot of your brain functions start to slow down quite significantly. And to my understanding, this is also where you start getting a switching off of your bodily movement. So when you're asleep, what happens is your brain secretes a chemical which goes into the top of your spinal column, and it basically paralyzes you, which is why you don't act out your dreams. The way that this was discovered is researchers actually like damaged that part of the spinal column in a cat, and this fully asleep cat got up in the middle of its sleep and started like running around the room as if it was chasing a mouse or something, even though it was fully asleep. So that switching off of your body's movement is important. Again, this is believed to be from when we were sleeping in trees or whatever, because if you're sleeping in a tree and you start moving in your dream and you move in real life, you'll fall out the tree and die. So we evolved not to do that. After stage 3, then you get stage 4, which is what Ruby was referring to as deep sleep. So in the deep sleep phase, this is kind of, as Ruby mentioned, this is when your body will replenish a lot of the resources that get utilized throughout the day. So this is where a lot of your neurotransmitters get re-secreted, like replenished. It's also where, so during the day, I think we mentioned this on a recent podcast, in your brain, you use a lot of energy, of course, because you're awake and your brain requires energy. And throughout that process, it gets a buildup of something called adenosine. What adenosine does is it binds onto adenosine receptors, and that creates something called a sleep pressure. This is why you feel really tired after you've been awake for a really long time. Caffeine actually blocks those receptors. That's how caffeine gets rid of tiredness. So during stage 4, all of that adenosine gets cleared out so that you wake up feeling refreshed the next day. That's why stage 4 sleep is so important for not feeling like a bag of shit when you wake up. And then you get REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement. This is where your brainwave activity actually increases quite a lot. And this is where dreams happen. Now, interestingly, and this is where I think this is an important bit of context for what we're going to say later in the podcast. At the start of the night, when you first go to sleep, and these cycles, as Ruby says, at the start of the night, they're about 90 minutes long. Towards the back end of the night, they're a little bit shorter, and there's individual variation. So your sleep cycle might be 100 minutes, mine might be 80, but it's all about 90. At the start of the night, your sleep cycles have a relatively greater proportion of stage 4 sleep. So the few sleep cycles that you experience throughout the night are the really restorative ones. Throughout the night, as you progressively go through more and more sleep cycles, you actually get less deep sleep and you get more REM sleep, which is why you tend to wake up from dreams in the morning. Because you're experiencing more of those dream sleep stages around about the time when you would wake up anyway. And that should also get your little noggin jogging, thinking about how actually what that means is if I miss that last stage of sleep, I'm probably still going to be pretty restored because I've done most of the restorative sleep in the first half of the night anyway. And I think that's important for what we're going to talk about in a bit. But yeah, that's the basics of sleep architecture.
Yeah, and I also want to you might have heard of the glymphatic system drainage and the glymphatic system. That part of the whole adenosine clear out process also happens there, but our brain accumulates a shitload of toxins while we're awake, and that's what also gets cleared out in the deep non-REM sleep. So that is actually something that you need to help ward off Alzheimer's and dementia, because that is why your body has this natural process of clearing that out. And when you're awake, epinephrine and norepinephrine stop your brain from being able to use the lymphatic system, whole kind of thing there. So talking about now the impacts of not getting enough sleep, obviously we know that if our sleep is deprived, it has an impact on our body composition. And this is because if we are especially in a calorie deficit, we are going to lose a greater proportion, about 52% from muscle and only 48% from fat. It's around about that. So it's about like 60 to 40, 55 to 45, about that. So I would say sleep should be your number one priority, and you should ensure that you have a great environment for sleep if you're putting yourself into a calorie deficit. If you are wanting to build muscle, it is also very important because you actually want to put on muscle, not put on fat. And the reason it makes it really hard to petition the nutrients and to build muscle is because, like we just mentioned, your body isn't able to repair the damage that you're doing to your body. Your immune system is going to be shot, and muscle building and muscle repair is an immune process. And there's this thing called, like I mentioned at the start, with the pre-diabetes kind of phenotype that you end up, obesogenic phenotype you end up developing. It's because your blood sugars aren't able to be regulated properly. So there's a study that shows us that essentially after 1 week of short sleep, your blood sugar levels are disrupted so significantly that your doctor would classify you as being pre-diabetic. So our regulation of blood sugar, if that isn't regulated, you're going to be craving the very foods that are going to increase your blood sugar. So that's just creating this circle jerk of I'm craving high sugary foods, high fat foods, high calorie foods because my blood sugar is high. So you're just feeding this loop of feeling like trash. You're going to feel tired all the time. You're going to feel like you're, what's that word? Like you know, when you're like really tired but wired, you're going to feel tired but wired most of the day. And there's also studies that show that you can overeat up to between 200, 300, maybe even more calories at each main meal from sleep deprivation. And a lot of that is coming from foods that aren't really productive for your goals. They're going to be high calorie, high fat, high sugary foods, which again feed the cycle. And the worst part about this is those are the very foods that are going to disrupt your sleep. So now you're creating a feedback loop where what you're consuming is going to interrupt your sleep, and then you're going to have shitty sleep, and then you're going to wake up feeling the same way. So it's kind of really important to be very aware of that, because that's the feedback loop that you're putting upon yourself, which is why it's really important to prioritize high fiber foods, a lot of veggies, a lot of lean proteins, hydration. I'll let you take away the rest. Next point.
So I think it's really important to place hold on. It's really important to place a lot of the sleep research within context. So the research, for example, that finds that if you're in a calorie deficit and you're sleeping poorly, then you will lead to worse body composition changes than you would do if you weren't sleeping well. That is the case, but it's important to remember that in that piece of research, the participants weren't exercising. And it's almost certainly going to be the case that if you're sleeping badly while also training really hard, a big chunk of that difference is going to be mitigated. It's also important to keep in mind that when we're looking at, for example, research on a lack of sleep and deregulation of blood glucose, the same is true. And something that I say a lot is that if you exercise regularly, you can get away with a lot more than you would think. And that is not to say that sleeping poorly is not a problem. That's not to say that getting insufficient sleep is just not an issue. But it is to say that we need to be really cautious about how we interpret sleep research on health outcomes if that research is being done in inactive participants when we train. So it might be the case, for example, that if you sleep badly and you train hard, you get worse results than you would do if you slept badly and didn't train. Than if you slept well and trained, but you're still going to get reasonable results. It's not the case that if you're sleeping badly and eating well and training hard, that everything just goes to shit. That's just not how that works. Another point that I think is really important to keep in mind is that a lot of the findings of broader scale research, so when we see that bad sleep is associated with this health outcome or that health outcome, that comes from observational research that relies on self-reported data. So in other words, what that means is that people are telling the researchers how much they sleep, and this is then being correlated with worse outcomes. Now, there's a person that I really respect on the internet called Hank Green. He hosted SciShow for a really long time on YouTube. He helped me do my biology parts of my degree. His content's really good. He's a science person, and he has suggested something that he is called Hank's razor. So we've all probably heard of, I think it's Hanlon's razor. That which is presented without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, or that might be Hitchens' razor, whatever. A razor is just it's like a logical shorthand that you can use to get rid of hypotheses that don't really make sense. And Hank's razor is, if something can be explained by socioeconomics, it's probably socioeconomics that makes the biggest part of the difference. It's not means it's all of it, but it's some part of it. And so something that I think is really important when we're looking at research that indicates that bad sleep is associated with bad outcomes is the fact that people who sleep badly for a reason, and people who sleep well probably have circumstances that facilitate good sleep on the whole. And so while it might be the case that us health promoting people, we get good sleep on purpose because we know the health benefits, and we avoid bad sleep because we know that that's not good for us. A lot of the time, people who are sleeping badly, they're sleeping badly because they're overworked. They're sleeping badly because they potentially have other lifestyle factors that are a bit negative. So maybe they stay up late because they're drinking a lot. They stay up late because they're really stressed during the day, so they want to watch TV and wind down, and so they're undersleeping for that reason. And a lot of these health outcomes that are often attributed directly to sleep, that attribution comes primarily from observational research that doesn't properly factor in all of these additional factors. Now, again, that's not to say that sleeping badly is not a bad thing. But for instance, when we look at health outcomes, kind of as Ruby mentioned early in the podcast, it's not the case that bad sleep is bad and more sleep is always better. There's a curve on a graph that basically looks like a tick. So in other words, short sleep is really bad for your health. Good sleep is better for your health. And then longer and longer and longer sleep starts to get gradually worse and worse and worse and worse for your health. And it seems to be that the people who live the longest sleep about 6 to 7 hours. So when people say that you need to have 7 to 9 hours sleep, and if you don't get 7 to 9 hours sleep, that's a problem. And when all the messaging is, oh, you need 7 to 9 hours sleep, and then we're talking about how if you don't sleep well, then you're at risk of developing pre-diabetes, which, as Ruby says, that was found in research. That is not a made-up claim. We need to place all of these things in context. And I often wonder, and I often worry, that if the messaging that we're putting out as health-promoting people is that people need to sleep 8-9 hours a night, otherwise you're going to be unhealthy, and that's not backed by evidence, all we're doing is we're making people really worried that they need to sleep more and more and more. And because their lifestyle doesn't allow for that, because they simply do not have the hours in the day, we're placing additional stress on people, which is arguably going to be more harmful than the bad sleep was in the first place.
I think this is also why I first highlighted that it's one of the, I think I highlighted it. If I'm not, I'm highlighting it now. It's also one of the last things that Mike T. Nelson talks about, which is what he mentioned on the last podcast, which you would have heard, because it's usually the last one people want to address. So why don't we address the other lifestyle factors? Because everything is kind of like a circle jerk with each other. You're going to have negative health outcomes with negative sleep. If that negative sleep is then going to impact your food choices, going to make your training performance shit, going to make everything else in life shit. But the biggest part that so many people miss out on, which is something that I try to instill in my girls, is cool, you had a bad night's sleep, whoop-de-doo. Pretend that you didn't. Because if you act like you did, you're going to go through the day acting like shit, feeling like shit, not doing what you can do, not showing up to training the way that you could, because you're just focusing on the fact that you had a bad night's sleep. Like, I do everything I can to pretend that I don't have a bad night's sleep, aside from the first hour of waking up that I complain like a little baby in bed. But other than that, that's because that's me just waking up. So I take an extra hour to wake up if I had a shitty sleep. But then I just pretend that it never existed because I have shit to get done. My training is important. My food is important. And if I let it impact the rest of my day, that's then going to impact the next night's sleep and the next night's sleep. So your mindset about the poor sleep that you had, your mindset about how your day is going to turn out, how you might be more hungry, how you might perform like shit, is going to determine the outcome. And I say this with PMS as well. If you think that you're going to start craving more sugar, more carbs, more chocolate because you're going into your period, then that's exactly what you're going to crave. If you make yourself crave chicken, you'll probably crave chicken, because as soon as I see someone eat friggin' charcoal chicken, that's my craving. Like, you can believe yourself into these things. And I think this is really important with all these friggin' devices that are coming out, not just for sleep, but for all health metrics. If you let those devices tell you that you had a bad night's sleep, so now you're going to perform poorly, or that you should do restorative work and become this fragile flower because your watch tells you to become one, then that isn't helping the process. And yes, you will lose muscle because now you're not training as hard because your watch told you not to train as hard. And that's going to be the outcome every single time that you sleep poorly. But another thing to keep in mind with everything that Tom said, yeah, but cool, if you have one night bad sleep, that isn't as bad as a whole week of sleeping 4 hours a night. And there's also the fact that you could be in bed for 10 hours and still have really poor quality sleep and have the same outcomes as someone that slept 5 hours, because time in bed is different than actual sleep quality. And if that 10 hours of sleep was brought on by copious amounts of alcohol, that's just an extreme example, then you weren't really sleeping. You were just a zombied out monk. But that's just another thing to keep in mind. But then, like, there are so many different ways that you can also optimize your sleep. I'm going to talk about some and I'll let Tom take away the rest. The first one is there's one way to wake yourself up really well in the morning that I figured out, and that's getting really damn bright light into your eyes. Because if you can't get sun because the sun's not out, just get bright light shining into your eyes. It's the first thing I do when I wake up. I wake up, walk into the bathroom, turn my ceiling light on, and I stare at it for like 2 seconds, and it kind of wakes me up. And then I wash my face with cold water. Get yourself into a morning routine that you stick consistently with, because your body is going to love that. And expose it to daylight. If you can't expose it to daylight, expose it to a light. I would say expose it to a light, but then try to get daylight later on, which I need to get better at. But I'm kind of blessed in the fact that I have windows all around my room. So I get blessed with daylight in the morning. Try to get activity in the morning as well. You can take out the rest of the day.
Yeah, as I say, I just want to follow up on the light thing, and then I'll let you continue. So I have one of them as well. So I've got a Lumi SAD lamp that I have on my desk. It's probably the most wellness wankery thing that I do. But the reason that works, so earlier in the podcast, I mentioned about how adenosine builds up, that creates sleep pressure, and that's why you feel really tired. The other reason you feel really tired is because of your circadian rhythm. We've all heard of the circadian rhythm. It's a thing that controls like sleep, wake, and hunger and all that bollocks. Well, your circadian rhythm is trainable. The reason we know this is because if it was the case that your circadian rhythm was fixed and it never changed, if I, who live in England, moved to Australia, where time is basically flipped, I would never, ever grow accustomed to being awake during the day because my circadian rhythm was set in England. But that's not how that works. How it works is your circadian rhythm can be trained through a part of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which has these special receptors in your eyes. So these special receptors in your eyes that don't do vision. We know this because congenitally blind people have this effect as well, so they can't see, but this actually works for them too. And what the special light receptors in your eyes do is they send a signal to this little part of your brain that goes, "Ooh, it's daylight. It's time to wake up. Get awake. Get awake." And if you live outside of like ideal conditions, like around about the tropics, for some part of the year, you're probably going to have to wake up when it's still dark. I live in the north of England. For a decent chunk of the year, it doesn't really get like daylight here until about 9 a.m. and then it starts getting dark at about 4 p.m. Like we have really short days here. I think in the depths of winter, it gets light at like 10 a.m. It starts to get dark again at about 3:30. And so you can, if you live somewhere like that, you can practice something called phase shifting, which is where you expose yourself to really bright light as early as you can. And what this does is it tells your circadian rhythm, right, this is morning time. And this can actually help to increase the onset of sleepiness around about the time you want to. So exactly as Ruby says, exposing yourself to light early on is a really good idea. If you can get natural light, that's going to be ideal. If not, you can use one of these SAD lamps. I would recommend getting a proper SAD lamp, SAD lamp. It stands for seasonal affect disorder, purely because I used to have a shit one, right? I had a cheap one, and it actually gave me sunburn. The good ones don't emit UV light. They don't emit the UVB rays that give you sunburn. So get a good one. Don't give yourself sunburn.
That's funny. I probably sound clearer now as well. I didn't know I was using the wrong microphone. But that's a great way to start the day. The other thing I want to note with the whole circadian rhythm is that also means that you can train your appetite, which is why you should eat at similar times every single day, because you might not be able to make big jumps like hours at a time, but it's been shown in research. I haven't read this in years. I think it's like you can do it by 30 to 45 minutes at a time. You can retrain things. I'm pretty sure it's 30 to 45 minutes. Because it was a really interesting research paper I read, but you can do it in increments about that and retrain yourself to be hungry at certain times as well. So if you're someone that's used to eating like 5 times a day or 6 times a day and you want to bring it down to 4 times a day, you're going to have some adjusting period there as well. And same with your sleep cycle. Give yourself the grace of that adjusting period by doing exactly what we said in the morning, and get in intense exercise if you can in the morning as well, or at least within the first like 2 hours of waking up, even if it's just movement, like walking. Get a walking pad, just get movement in, because that's going to help you with the whole circadian cycle. And then before you go to bed, I love lavender oil on the pillow. I do it as often as I can. That is like one of the best things to do. And my girls used to make jokes way back when. They used to like send me memes of someone just in a lavender bed of flowers, because I used to talk about lavender oil on the bed so much. But it makes a difference. Melatonin before you sleep is pretty damn good as well. I take 10 milligrams, to be honest. I take 5 about 90 minutes before I sleep, and then I take 5 about 45 minutes before I sleep, and that helps. But otherwise, just have 5 milligrams. It's plenty. And I would also suggest getting a really high quality magnesium. Go for magnesium bisglycinate. Get it off iHerb. There's California Gold, any of those. Magnesium glycinate, great before bed. Great for muscle relaxation, great for brain relaxation and everything else. But it's a great way for me to sum up supplements to help you with sleep and everything else to improve you with sleep. Anything else that you want?
I mean, like, I know there's lots of stuff that you're supposed to do that improves sleep. Now, I don't know if this is just me. I'm very, very open to the idea that this is just like a natural privilege that I have, but I've never struggled with sleep. I sleep really deeply. Like, if you want to wake me up, you have to put a bit of effort in. And I can usually get to sleep quite quick. With that said, there are some things that I do on purpose. So I'm a nighttime showerer. I get a shower before I go to bed. Otherwise, I feel disgusting, and that doesn't help. It's probably a comfort thing. Like, I could come up with some reason why that works, but it's probably a comfort thing.
Is it a hot shower?
Yeah, yeah.
That helps. So the hot shower actually reduces your core temperature, which helps you sleep at night. So don't do cold baths and cold bloody bullshit. Have a hot bath. It actually helps you with your sleep. Continue.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I don't know how. Yeah, I've heard that before.
It helps.
Yeah, so I do that. So I have a shower before I go to bed. I also brush my teeth before I go to bed, as you should do. So in other words, I feel clean before I go to sleep, and that helps. When I train, I always train early. So I train early morning. Regular exercise is associated with improved sleep. Exercise within about an hour of going to sleep can disrupt it. So train as early as you can. If you can only train in the evening, that's fine. That's better than not training. But train as early as you can. I try not to eat anything within about an hour or so of going to bed, just so I'm not like full of food when I get to sleep. Some people find that helps. I don't. And the only thing that I actually do is I have something called a music cozy. It's basically like a headband with little earbud things in it. So it's like having headphones on, but comfortable, and it covers your eyes. So it's like a night mask with earbuds in, and I just put some white noises on something, and that's always helped me get to sleep. I don't know if that's a real thing or just because. So I used where I grew up, our house was probably about 50 yards away from a motorway. So I always had like noise outside. Like I've never slept in a really quiet environment. And so now I live somewhere, like I live in the middle of an estate, so it's actually really quiet on a night time. So yeah, I have some white noise on just because I like having a bit of background noise on, or a fan or something like that.
That's actually backed as well, and that's exactly why I sleep the way that I do. I need to listen to a podcast before I sleep, because growing up, like literally up until probably year 8, even year 7, it happened. My dad used to read me to sleep, so I need to have people talking in the background. Like it can't be bright, because it needs to be just like people talking about mundane stuff. It can't be exciting. It just needs to be like reading a book, because that kind of mimics what my dad used to do. So I listen to a podcast before I sleep, and I sleep most of the time unless I get high and wired, not from doing free and whatever that thing's called. What's it called?
Weed. I have no idea.
Not from doing weed, but high from freaking like just stimulating myself. I mean,
weed would definitely help you sleep, to be fair.
Oh, whoops. Well, then I got it wrong. But I usually fall asleep within the 15 minutes of my podcast sleep timer. So that's something you can do as well. Just like put something on, put like meditation music on, if that's what you want to listen to, and just put the timer on and it'll turn off. And you can also realize, hey, I fell asleep. I don't remember it turning off. It didn't take me that long to fall asleep. So there's something that can benefit you there as well.
Yeah. As a final tip, so I have a few clients who wake up in the night, and if you wake up in the night, first things first, that's really normal. So throughout the night, as we talked about, you go through various different stages of sleep, and you kind of like cycle through them. You'll sometimes cycle back to stage 1. And if you have to go to the toilet, or if it's particularly noisy in the room, chances are when you're in stage 1, you will regain consciousness again. It's really normal to wake up a bunch of times in the night. Normally, you won't even remember it. So if you're looking at your sleep watch and you're like, oh, I woke up 6 times last night, that's fine. That's what sleep is. That's fine. Don't worry about it. But if you wake up and you struggle to get to sleep, the advice from insomnia experts and such is as follows: get out of bed. If you wake up in the night and you can't get back to sleep, do not lie there and try to get back to sleep, because all that's going to happen is you're going to get frustrated, and over time you'll develop an association between bed and that place that I lie frustrated, not being able to sleep. So get out of bed, go into a different room, sit in fairly dim lighting. So we have a lamp that we got from IKEA and a light bulb that we got. So we're talking about 12 quid's worth of things here. But it's like 20 lumens or something. Like it's a really dim orangey light, which is really quite nice to sit with. And you can sit and write down the stuff you're thinking about in a notepad. This serves 2 purposes. First of all, you're sitting there in a non-stimulating environment doing something that's non-stimulating, which means that your brain can relax again. And as soon as you feel really sleepy, you can go back to bed and you can go to sleep. And secondly, oftentimes when people can't sleep, what they tell me is that they can't empty their head, or their head's going a mile a minute, or they're thinking too much. Oftentimes, if you strip things back far enough, what you'll find is that the reason that you're not able to sleep when you're thinking too much is because there's something on your mind that you feel that you need to deal with, or you've got an idea that you want to action, or there'll be a plan that you want to make, or there'll be something that you want to do the following day, and you're terrified that you're going to forget it. If you write it down, you can't forget it. So you can write down all of these things that are stressing you out, all of these thoughts, all of these ideas, and if you write them down, then you can be like, right, that's fine. I will get to that tomorrow. I've written it down. I'm not going to forget it. It's going to be there. And then you can go back to sleep and you can sleep. Now, that's not going to work for everybody, but that's typical insomnia advice, and it's what I usually ask my clients to do.
I reckon everybody should actually do a brain dump, always do a brain dump, even if it's just a to-do list, which I used to do all the time and I need to get better at. If I can actually think about what to put on my to-do list, it's normally the very first thing I do in the morning. And I want to add 2 more things to the waking up during the night, and then we can sum it up. But 2 things. 1, honey before you sleep if you find yourself waking up, because a lot of the time it's something that I gave a few of my girls when they found themselves waking up around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock-ish, because a lot of the time it can be just like depleted liver glycogen waking you up, depending on the person. And someone else, I gave them just a little bit of salt in whatever their last meal was, and for some reason that helped them sleep through as well. Maybe it was just like water not being balanced properly, who knows, but they didn't pee as much because of that as well. So there is that. So just 2 things you can try. The honey thing works really well if you're someone that wakes up around in the second half of the night. But yeah, I think we pretty much summed anything up. If there's anything else you want us to talk about, we had people reach out saying they like the debunking stuff. So if you have anything you want us to debunk, we'll probably debunk Glucose Goddess on the next podcast, because it's something that we both roll our eyes up, because I never knew it was as big as it is now. But people are okay with that. We'll talk about continuous glucose monitors and
let's do that. Let's do that.
Perfect. We will you will see us and you will hear us on the next podcast, because we ain't hearing jack shit unless you reach out to us. So love yous and bye.
Cheers, everyone.